welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to give you an update on my Phalaenopsis Bellina. So I got this orchid 3 years ago and I repotted it with you guys, and I want to show you how it's grown these last 3 years. And I personally like to see videos where I see some continuity on how an orchid has been growing. So I got a tiny Phalaenopsis Bellina from Hauserman Orchids about 3 years ago. I repotted it on this channel with you guys into sphagnum moss and it grew really well. I repotted it again last year, so it was 2 years in the original pot, 1 year in the pot I'm gonna show you now. And it's grown extremely nicely. When it blooms, it's just lovely, amazing fragrance, and it's been growing in sphagnum moss really well these last couple of years, but it's gotten a lot bigger. So let me walk you through what it looks like now when we take out the roots out of here and what it looked like before, so you could see how it's grown in 3 years, and it was a fraction of the size of this. So let's jump right in. So here's my Phalaenopsis Bellina. She is so huge right now, and this has been growing for 3 years. And when I first got her, she was so tiny. She basically was in a little tiny pot, like a 2-inch pot, and I got her from Hauserman Orchids, about $20, as I mentioned. She was super cheap, and I repotted her into moss. I remember she came in some bark and perlite. The roots were very tiny. I got this along with a Phalaenopsis violacea. The violacea is still a little bit smaller than this, but this one is growing so much bigger now. I put her into moss, very fluffy moss. It's something I learned from Miss Orchid Girl a couple years back, and it's worked really well for me. I kept it in that moss setup for about 2 years, and then last summer I put it into this pot. So it's been growing here for 1 year, except it's pushed out these heavy leaves, and although this is fine, this is a very short, shallow pot, and it's not gonna, over time, it's gonna start tipping over and stuff. I'm gonna put it into a slightly bigger pot, taller pot, deeper for the roots, and it should be happy. You'll notice that there's a couple of markings here. This one did have some spider mites at some point, but otherwise it's doing just fine. And sadly, when it bloomed for the first time, I made the mistake of actually displaying her on top of my radiator. So I have a radiator in my living room, and the radiator doesn't come on in the city until it gets cold, and I hadn't had any heat that whole year. And then for some reason, the day that it bloomed, I left her on the radiator and the heat came on. And when I woke up in the morning, I freaked out and I was like, oh my God, the bottom 2 leaves burned off. The leaves are no longer here. They were lower. This happened almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, last October, but I had the leaves and they just completely scorched and burned off. So this orchid was set back as well a little bit, but it's about to bloom. It hadn't bloomed for a while. There's a spike pushing out right over here, right through the leaf. So we will see it in bloom very soon. I have my Phalaenopsis Bellina cerulean, which I'll show you right now. This one is in bloom, and this one's just gorgeous. It has the same exact fragrance. It's growing quite nicely. The leaves are starting to come down, but I'm gonna leave this here for a little bit. Quite frankly, I've been very behind on repotting, so I'm just gonna take my time with it and just get them done slowly as I'm able to, but I really love this Bellina. So let's get started on repotting this. I'm gonna put it back in the same exact setup that it was in. I'm gonna put it into a slightly larger pot, and we're gonna use fluffy sphagnum moss. So let's start freeing these roots here. All right, so let's free it up. So this version of the Bellina is the Phalaenopsis Bellina Platinum crossed with the Phalaenopsis Bellina Red Star. And Hauserman always has a bunch of different kinds. So when I ordered it, I don't remember what I said I ordered, but they sent me this version, but they're all slightly different with their color, but they tend to all smell the same. So let's see what the root system is like in here. So it's very shallow, so it's time to get rid of it. So in order to free it, I soaked it in some water, so it's going to be nice and easy to remove. And we're gonna just gently take the roots out. I could tell here that I added some coconut husk to make this a little bit more airy. I don't know what this is. This looks like a little bit of fungus. So I'm gonna spray this down with some hydrogen peroxide. I was not expecting this, but you could see that it has like a little bit of, what's it called? It has some eggs in here. You could kind of see it a little bit there. I probably should have used gloves for this, but of course I did not, so we're just gonna keep going with it, but I'm definitely gonna spray this down with some hydrogen peroxide, but it's definitely a good time to repot it, especially when you see something like that. I was not expecting that. So we're just gonna gently take the moss outside of it. Yeah, you could definitely see it here. This is so gross. I should definitely be wearing gloves, but whatever at this point. You could kind of see like the little eggs there. I don't know if this is like spider egg or something like that, or just like fungus that's grown on it, but I have seen it on some of my orchids before. Not very common for my collection, but I've seen it grow in the mix. So I definitely put this in about 90% moss, maybe 10% husk, just to give it some air. And it looks like it did just fine, minus the little eggs there that you see. I don't know if they're mealy eggs or what, but we're gonna take care of that with some peroxide shortly. So let's get this off. I'm glad that I repotted it. I did not even know that that was in the mix here. And now this root system, this is a species orchid. It's quite vigorous, but it's not as vigorous as some of my hybrids. Like my LD's Bear King is insanely vigorous and huge, and it would literally grow out of a pot. So this one has a decent root system, but we have some that have died, so we're gonna start trimming those off. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give this a quick rinse, and we'll come back and take care of these roots. So we've rinsed this off and we have some peroxide here. So I'm gonna spray it down. This is 3% peroxide to kill anything off that's in there. I don't like when I see little like eggs or anything like that. Sometimes it's like some sort of fungus, or sometimes even I've seen mushrooms growing in some of these pots. Before you spray with peroxide, you should know that some people find it controversial and they don't do it. They think it damages the roots, but I personally have not had a problem with this in any of my orchids, and they seem to grow well. We're gonna go ahead and remove some of these roots that are no longer needed here. You can tell if a root is alive, basically if it's nice and silvery, if it has a growing root tip, it's great. If it doesn't have a growing root tip, it'll look something like a green bean if it's wet. If it's very papery and thin like this, there's no substance on the inside, we're gonna get rid of that. Now sometimes you'll see papery roots attached to roots that are healthy, and in that case, you're gonna cut just below where it's still alive. You don't wanna introduce a new wound to a fresh root. So let's get started here. This one is alive, even though the top is a little wonky looking, we'll leave that. This one here is dead. So I have been so behind on my repottings. I haven't done that much this summer. I have been keeping up with the watering, which is great. So my orchids are pretty happy in that they're getting plenty of water. So I just have to repot a lot. I have a lot that I want to get out of semi-hydro and into organic setups, but I just haven't had the time. So when I'm able to, I start, I'll do it little by little. Last year I did 100 in 30 days, and that was intense for me. And I'm pretty intense. I have a big collection anyway, so I mean, you need some level of intensity to let your collection get that big, right? But this year I haven't really been feeling some of the repotting. I'm just doing like the ones that need it the most. So like the emergency repots, things that have grown out every year. I don't believe that you need to repot everything every single year. If you use high quality material like high quality bark or New Zealand sphagnum moss, you could get away with a lot of that for 2 years, depending on the quality and depending on the growth rate of the orchid. This looks pretty good. So some of these are tiny bit iffy. Okay, I took that out. Let's see. These are some of the original roots, actually. They're right here. I'm just gonna see if I could just rip this off. Yeah, when they have no substance. This one has some substance, so that will stay, but it'll probably die off next year. And I think that's it. Like, this looks pretty good. It's not the most vigorous orchid, as I said, but it's just fine. So we're gonna get this into new sphagnum moss. Side note, so I saw some eggs still on some of the roots on top. So what I did was I rinsed it off a little more, and I made sure to spray a little bit more hydrogen peroxide to kill them. So I think this root system is now very clean, and it's ready to go into a larger pot. So I have the 6-inch plastic pot here. I like the plastic pots because they are a little bit lighter, they don't break, and the only problem with using plastic pots is that because they're not heavy, when it's tipped over, when the leaves get too heavy, they may tip over. So what I like to do in that case is, I've got some river rocks here. I used to use these for my semi-hydro orchids. I'm just gonna put them down in the bottom of the pot to weigh it down. I'm gonna be careful not to cover the drainage holes, but I'm gonna put it on the different sides here at the very bottom, so that when this orchid is, so that it has a little bit more weight, that way it doesn't tip over as easily. Now I have some fresh sphagnum moss here, and I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna make sure it's nice and fluffed up. So I'm gonna slowly add it down here. And we're gonna get started with the repot. So the rocks may shift a little bit, but as long as you have it covered, it should be okay. I don't think it'll cover the drainage hole, and it should be all right. So we're gonna do that. I'm just putting it in, but as you can see, I have it kind of fluffy in here. And then I'm gonna take my root ball. And what I like to do is I like to take the root ball and put some moss on the inside here. So I'm gonna take this and we're gonna gently put some of that moss in there, very lightly. And then we're gonna throw it into our pot. So I have a little bit of moss in the middle of the root ball, and then we're gonna gently put moss on the sides. Very gently. And yes, I get a lot of comments all the time with people that say you can't use sphagnum moss, it compacts down over time. That's true, it does compact down over time. I find that if you're doing something bigger than a 6-inch pot, you definitely need some bark in there to add a little bit more air. But you can also still get away with just using moss. You just have to repot whenever it starts compacting down. But I don't press it down. Over time, yes, the water will kind of like squish it down, but I haven't had a problem with the orchids repotting. Depending, every 1 to 2 years, it tends to be okay. And this is very high quality sphagnum moss. It's a AAA grade. You will have an issue over time as well with the nutrients getting trapped in there. It's hard to flush this because you're flushing it, but things will remain over time. So when you start seeing it get salty on top and you can't get rid of it, it may be time to repot it, but I find that, again, I don't have that many issues with this, and I've been using this grow method for a while now, over 3 years, and I haven't had any problems. The only time I would add more stuff to this is when it's a much larger pot. You have a 7-inch pot, you're definitely gonna want some bark, some husk, some perlite, something to keep it a little bit more airy, but I find that this is okay, and this will work well. And this is an orchid that likes its roots moist. It likes to stay hot. It likes to be watered as it's approaching dryness. It does not want to stay dry for too long. This is one of those hot growing phals. It's not even a warm growing phal, it's a hot growing phal. So I'm okay with making sure that it's in moss, and just this will stay nice and moist. That's why I like this. Oh, this is nice and heavy on the bottom, heavier than I expected. And the pebbles aren't shifting around. The orchid is shifting a little bit, but it'll take some time for those roots to come in. I'm gonna leave it alone. You could put a support stake in here and then kind of hold the leaves, but this one is okay. And I've put moss gently all around. We have a good amount in here, and I think we're good to go. This is all good to go. This was a very simple repot. I expect it to continue to hang, but with the weight at the bottom, this will counteract the hanging because, yeah, it's made a difference. It's not quite as heavy as a clay pot, but it's also not gonna tip over as easily, so that's great. And this is all set. I will keep you updated on it. It should be blooming hopefully in another month or so. Hopefully by the end of summer we'll have some blooms there, and you guys will see it when it's good to go. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more orchid content. Bye everyone.